Hello, my friends. Today we'll start with the fact that 2 weeks Trump gave Putin and Zelensky for direct talks have already passed. Russia refused, saying the negotiations first needed to be prepared at the delegation level. And after these 2 weeks, Trump was supposed to impose strong sanctions. But in the end, he simply decided to say that he wasn't happy with what was happening and disappointed.
I'm very disappointed in him. He and I always had a great relationship. Very disappointed. Thousands of people are dying. They're not Americans that are dying, but they're Russians and they're Ukrainians, and there's thousands, and it's a war that makes no sense. And it would have never started if I were president, and that's what bothers me even more because the election was totally rigged, and it's a shame. We'll see what happens, but I'm very disappointed in President Putin. I can say that. And we'll be doing something to help people live. You know, it's not a question of Ukraine. It's help people live. 7,000 people are dying every single week, soldiers mostly, but 7,000 people. And if I can help to stop that, I think I have an obligation to do it.
Trump also once again said that he had learned something very interesting, but of course he will tell us about it in a few days.
I have learned things that will be very interesting. I think in the next few days you'll find out.
Consequences if there isn't some type of announcement of a meeting with President Putin and President Zelensky? And what could those consequences be?
We're going to see what happens. We're going to see what they do and what happens. I'm watching it very closely.
As we can see, Trump is once again promising sanctions, but when? They remain unknown. Now let's move to the frontline situation, starting with the Pokrovsk direction. Here, alongside good news, there is also some bad news. We know that according to the official statement from the General Staff of Ukraine, the village of Udachne has been fully liberated from the Russians. But yesterday, late in the evening, a Ukrainian soldier reported that the situation there remains difficult. Udachne area, Pokrovsk direction. The situation is mixed. Our fighters are reporting control over the settlement, but primarily around the school area. Of course, this doesn't mean the entire settlement, as the Russians are still present in the village itself, though not everywhere. Movement between battle positions is very risky because the Russians actively monitor the air, use reconnaissance, and can target any movement. So, in order to fully clear the settlement, a lot more effort will be needed. At the same time, Russian activity is noted further south, in the area of Molodetsky, to the west of Udachne. Russian sabotage groups have already tried to infiltrate there, which indicates their intention to expand pressure in this direction as well. There is a risk of further Russian advancement, so we must be ready for escalation there. Thus, Ukrainian soldiers show that the situation here is not exactly as some sources describe. In addition, it became known yesterday that Russian forces have already begun entering Pokrovsk with their main forces, and this seriously changes the situation. If earlier it was mostly small sabotage groups breaking through, against which many reserves had been deployed, now the Russians are pushing in with regular troops and trying to gain a foothold in the city. Whether it will be possible to stabilize the situation again remains an open question, but the Ukrainian forces are trying hard to turn the tide. Meanwhile, heavy fighting continues in the Novoekonomichne area. Soldiers on the ground describe the situation as follows. Marnograd direction. The southern part of Novoekonomichne is fully under our control. The Russians still hold the northeastern part of the settlement, covering approaches with artillery and mortars, trying to keep us at a distance from the private sector and the tree lines along the edge of the town. Our fighters are gradually concentrating in the south for a push. The critical step will first be to isolate the northern part, roads, field approaches from the direction of Myrne, then move into the private housing sector with clearing operations in the tree lines and yards. The village of Mykolaievka, meanwhile, remains a gray zone, with neither side in a stable control and both entering periodically. So here too, things are not as simple as they might seem. At the same time, the Ukrainian forces are already working to disrupt Russian logistics. Geolocation data clearly shows strikes beginning in the area of Vozdvizhenka and the road near the village. This means Ukrainian troops are trying to break the situation in their favor and move forward. But for now, the fight continues and we'll have to wait and see how events develop next. In the Dobropillia direction, the Russians are storming Volodymyrivka and Nikhanorivka. So far, the Russians haven't achieved any major success here, but unfortunately, this salient still hasn't been cut off. The front line remains unchanged. However, I think everyone understands that the longer the Russians stay in this area, the more seriously they will entrench themselves and be able to pull in additional reserves and equipment for further attacks. So the situation here is not improving yet. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are storming Udachne, Filia, Ivanivka, Zelený Gай, Oleksandrograd, and Novoselivka. At the same time, yesterday the Russians made some gains in the fields between Ivanivka and Filia. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian forces managed to push them back slightly near Udachne and Filia, retaking some positions. The fighting here is extremely fierce, but it's clear that the initiative is on the side of the Russians, as they are carrying out a massive number of assaults along the entire front line. As a result, the gray zone is already expanding significantly. In the Velyka Novosilka direction, the Russians are pushing toward Novoselivka, near Komushuvacha and Malievka. However, there have been no new changes over the past day, and the fighting continues. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are advancing in the area of the village of Plavny, closer to Stepnogirsk. Daily attacks don't stop, but so far they haven't achieved any new success. Still, in recent days, the Russians managed to improve their positions here, and as a result, the front line is gradually sagging in this sector as well. In the Kherson direction, the Russians are pushing through on the islands and also shallow the right bank. However, over the past day, there have been no changes and all attacks were successfully repelled. And now let's move to the Kostiantynivka direction. Here, the Russians are assaulting Mykolaievka from two sides. Fighting is also taking place for Stupochki, Pleshiivka, and they are pushing through near the village of Klebanbyk. In addition, battles continue in the areas of Rusin Yar and Poltavka, and yesterday the Russians began claiming that they had advanced toward Sofiivka. During the last 4 days, the Russian army continued advancing towards Sofiivka and Rusinivka quarries, taking control over a series of positions in these directions. So far, there is no confirmation from the Ukrainian side, so we wait. But if the Russians really did manage to move forward there, it would be a serious setback. That would allow them to further expand the salient in the defense in the Dobropillia direction, and cutting off that bulge would no longer be possible. In the Siversk direction, the Russians are pushing toward Yampil and Dronivka, assaulting Serebryanka, and fighting also continues in the areas of Horохorivka and Vyemka. As for Fedorivka, apart from the Russian Ministry of Defense's claim, there is still no evidence of the village being captured, and the Ukrainian side hasn't provided any information either. So for now, we wait. In the Lyman direction, the Russians are assaulting Dvorichna and pushing through the fields near the village of Kolodezi. Attacks on Chandrigolovo also continue. Ukrainian forces even reported that the Russians managed to break into the village itself, although they haven't been able to gain a foothold there yet. All these assaults are taking place across the fields. Meanwhile, attacks on Kharkivka are ongoing, but over the past day there have been no new changes in that area. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Nova Konamicha and Novoekonomichne. So far, there have been no changes, and the Ukrainian forces are successfully repelling all attacks. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians are again attempting to break through to the outskirts of Kupiansk, from which they had previously been pushed back by Ukrainian forces. And they are also assaulting Petropavlivka and pushing in the area of Stepova Novoselivka. But over the past day, the front line has remained unchanged. In the Dvorichna area, the Russians haven't carried out any new assaults, and the situation hasn't changed over the past day. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians have been assaulting the village of Gliboka for almost a week, but they have had no success, and all attacks have been repelled. Fighting continues in Vovchansk as well, but the front line remains unchanged. In the Sumy direction, the Russians are carrying out around 10 assaults per day near Oleksiivka, Yunakivka, and across the border, but the Ukrainian forces are successfully holding the line, and there have been no changes. There are repeated attempts to break through near the village of Tyotkina, but the front line has remained unchanged over the past day, and all attacks have been repelled. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy commented on Putin's claims that he didn't start this war.
The audacity of the Russians keeps growing. They attack Ukraine daily with dozens of strike drones. Last night there were 150 drones, more than 50 in the morning, and dozens more in the evening, most of them Shaheds. These Russian drone groups in our skies are basically an accompaniment to Russian statements from China. It's blatant disregard for everything the world is doing to end the war. Yesterday, the Russians literally denied what President Trump said about the leaders' meeting needed to end the war. Putin continues to spin his stories in China, acting as if he's innocent in this war. Otherwise, someone would always be forcing him to fight, kill, drive children into shelters, send thousands to assault our positions. Now we see further Russian force buildups in some areas of the front, but he refuses to be forced toward peace. Russia keeps striking, and of course, we will respond, including asymmetrically, so Russia truly feels the consequences of its audacity, while we continue working with partners to pressure Russia. That's what will happen.
And that's all from me. So friends, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.